Okay, so where did this come from? That's my question. Where did COVID come from? Okay.
Donald Trump said it was a China virus.
Well, it may well have done, but you know, there's a lot of scientists around the world who are looking for this special virus, and you know the really weird thing? They can't find it. They can't find it. Now, when you go and start learning medical microbiology, you learn a couple of things really, really quickly. And the first thing is that when you look at disease, that means dis-ease, that means not being at ease, not being well within yourself. There are two factors that are important. One is the virulence or the strength of the pathogen that's going to try and make you sick, and the other is the strength of the host. That's you. So how strong is your immune system compared to that of the virus? Well done. Okay, so susceptibility of the host and virulence of the disease. That's the balance of scales for what is going to tell whether you get a disease or not. The next thing they tell you is that there's lots of bugs out there, and by bugs, microbiologists just mean bacteria, fungi, viruses, prions, and then they get bigger, they become worms and parasites. But when we're talking about bugs, I want to talk a lot of cotton now, because I think that's really important. I know the government is doing that all the time, so why can't I? So what I'm going to talk about is a guy called Koch. He was a German, quite a nice chap apparently, and he came up with a whole series of processes to allow you to work out if something caused a disease. So he said, you've got to do a few things. Firstly, when you get a whole lot of sick people that are all sick in the same way, what you've got to do is say, well, can I isolate some little buggle thing from their blood or their sputum or other parts of their body I don't want to talk about because it's near my lunchtime. So he said the first thing you've got to do is get that little thing out. And you have to find that that little thing is associated with all the people who've got the disease. And that's pretty fair, isn't it? So you've got a bit of a smoking gun there, or if you like hamburgers, it could be a smoking bun. But that's okay. So he went on and he said, all right, team, what we've got to do now is we've got to grow this little sucker up in the lab and have a look at it. We need lots of these little suckers because they're so damn tiny. And then what we want to do is we want to be able to take those ones that we've grown and then pump them into people or animals. We've got to pump them in and see if they get sick. So that's the bottom. There's a few extra little steps in there, but essentially that's the deal. So you've got to find out people that are sick, what's the thing they've all got in common, take it out, reinfect other people. Is it doing the same thing? Now that's pretty reasonable. Anyone disagree with that? Anyone think that's a load of bollocks? A load of cock? No, it was pretty good cock actually, I understand. Not that I've tested it a lot. So it may surprise you to know that the cornerstone of determining the agent of disease, the cornerstone, the foundation, like this thing here, the foundation of medical microbiology is finding the bug, isolating it and making sure that it's the real deal. Now the interesting thing, nobody has done that with COVID. Let me just say that again because I quite liked it. Nobody has done that with COVID. So from day one, but they made a vaccine, sir. A very good question. They made it up from a database in computer files. They made it up. They made it up from a database. Now, for those of you that want a little bit of the science, okay, the coronavirus, it's not a very good virus actually, it's a hellishly boring virus. The only thing that is nice about it is that it's got a long heritage, and at the moment it's got the best PR of any virus you've ever seen in your life. Shit, whoever's doing the PR for that thing, I wish they'd do my PR. Man, they're good. So this little virus is called a coronavirus because people who name these things looked at it and they said, oh look, it's got little blobs of candy floss all round the outside, and they kind of look like the corona of the sun, this fluffy lot of protein. Now of course you got to start manipulating the people, so these fluffy bits of candy floss, talking the truth here, you understand, these bits of candy floss are now called the spike protein. The evil spike protein. Wow, wonder what they look like. So the interesting thing, sir, about your question, which I very deeply appreciate, when they made the so-called vaccine, because it's not a vaccine, let's not get confused with the terminology, okay, it's a genetic engineering experiment. It's quite simple really, it's not difficult. So what they did was they made up a set of this chemical called messenger RNA so that it will make the spike protein, but of course they had to cheat. It's not actually the spike protein of the coronaviruses. It's kind of a facsimile, a bit of a look-alike. You know, on a dark night you wouldn't notice the difference, but it's not the same. It's not the same. It's a fake. Of course it's a fake. Because they hadn't isolated the virus, they hadn't grown it in culture, and they hadn't fully sequenced it. So what they did, they took a spike protein from a database and they made it up. And they made a few changes just to make it novel. That means they can patent it. They made it up. Now, you know, you guys need to go and look at the internet, do your own research. I can't do it all for you because I'm getting hungry and I've got to go for lunch.
Thank you for doing this for us.
Thank you.
This is working a lot of us. Good on you.
I think the dog's quite interested as well.
Thank you.
So when you look into this, you see that it's fraud upon lie upon fraud. And I said to myself, where has this come from? Can anyone tell me where it's come from?
Linda.
Did you say Vaxinda? Oh yes, yeah. Sorry, it's hard to hear up here, you know. Okay, well it didn't. No, it didn't. You know that song that from the Seekers way back? When were the Seekers? 60s, late 60s, 70s? Sorry. Puppet on a String?
Yeah.
Puppet on a String. That's Jacinda and her colleagues. They're all puppets of Mr. Global and Pharmac. That's who's driving this. Big Pharma, Mr. Global.
By the way, guys, that's who takes out Palmer.
Okay, so what I want to do now, I want to go back to that little question about the history, because I did ask where has this come from, which is a very good question. So some of you that have been around a little while will remember the Secretary of State in the United States called Henry Kissinger. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger has warned of global economic doom. That was on the 5th of April 2020. He wrote an opinion piece for the Wall Street Journal on Friday, issuing a dire proclamation that failure could set the world on fire. Anyone read Revelations?
Yeah.
Here we are, burning up. Now this 96-year-old believes the White House has done a solid job in avoiding immediate catastrophe. Can anyone else see that as bullshit, or is it just me here? That's bullshit, correct. But he did say that the US, of course, needs to work quickly to find a cure, pitch in to rebuild the global economy, and protect the liberal world order. Not even in the US can a purely national effort overcome the virus, so it's all your fault as well. So he's blaming everybody here. Okay, enough of Henry. So that was in 5th of April 2020, for those of you that have got pen and paper. I want to take you back to 2009, February 25, when Henry Kissinger, good German, spoke to the WHO Council on Eugenics. On eugenics. This is directly quoting from him. I want you to listen carefully to this. If you take nothing away from my talk, take this away. Once the herd accepts mandatory vaccinations, it's game over. They will accept anything forcible blood or organ donation, all for the greater good.
AKA China. Because they're doing it in China.
Yeah. We can genetically modify children and sterilize them for the greater good. Control sheep minds and you control the herd. Vaccine makers stand to make millions. And many of you in this room are investors. It's a big win-win. We thin out the herd and the herd pays us for extermination services. Isn't that lovely? And you're all part of that. That's great. There you go. So let's pay to kill ourselves. Sadly, some people are doing it for nothing, which is why our suicide rate's going through the ceiling. So you're probably getting sick of me standing here. I'm getting sick of standing here because it's hot and I'm hungry. But I want to go back just a few more years. If you can give me another minute or two, this is really interesting. Thank you, brother. Okay, anyone remember François Mitterrand? François Mitterrand, can someone tell me who was that dude? Yes, he was the president, or, you know, El Bigo Chizo of Frogland, going back, I think, in the 80s, thereabout. Now, in 1981, Jacques Attali was an advisor to the president, or Bigot Chizo of France. And he said in an interview, and this is really interesting, the future will be about finding a way to reduce the population. We start with the old, because as soon as they exceed... Oh, I'm out of here. Shit gets me down. People live longer than they produce, and that costs society. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud to stand here today and say I'm costing society. Yes, cost society. Excellent. But Jack Baby went on, and he said, then the weak, then the useless that do not help society, because there will always be more of them, and above all, ultimately the stupid. Euthanasia will have to be an essential tool in our future societies in all cases. Of course, we will not be able to execute people or build camps. We get rid of them by making them believe that it is for their own good. So it's your own good. Go and top yourself. That's what the guy's saying. It just saves a lot of time. Overpopulation, and mostly useless, is something that is too costly economically. That means he's not getting enough money. Socially too, it is much better when the human machine comes to an abrupt standstill than when it gradually deteriorates. He loves the idea of falling off the cliff. Must be a lemming from a past life. We will find or cause something. A pandemic targeting certain people, a real economic crisis or not, a virus affecting the old or the fat, it doesn't matter. The weak will succumb to it. The fearful and stupid will believe in it and seek treatment. We will have made sure that treatment is in place, treatment that will be the solution. The selection of idiots then takes care of itself. You go to the slaughter by yourself. Any thoughts?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Do we have much to worry about with the protein spike that's coming out of the people that are vaccinated?
It's a very difficult question to answer. If you're talking about the spike protein in and of itself, I personally believe that's not a very great fear. That's not a great problem, because let's get this straight. The spike protein on its own is a genuine agent of disease, all by itself. And what it does, I won't go into the science because it's just too complicated and tricky, but basically it gets into your body and it causes blood clots. Now, if you're around a person who's shedding spike proteins, the actual amount they're spreading is 5/8 of fuck all. Okay. Well, you may, and when you think about it, a factory to make the agent of disease, and the hope is that your body is smart enough and says, I don't like this, and kills it. But my last question, a few years ago, maybe the last, 10, 15, 20 years, there's been a whole lot of talk about genetically modified food. Anyone remember that? Yeah. Okay, so a lot of people didn't like the idea of having frog genes in their lettuce, even though they were often green and the same sort of thing, but people didn't like that. My final question is, if we didn't like genetically modified food, why the hell are we standing for genetically modified people? I don't know. Okay, so what's in the vaccine? Well, of course we can't tell you what's in the vaccine because it's a proprietary product, and if we do that, everyone will start making it and selling it, and then we won't make a lot of money. But what we do know is in it, when you think about the process, what the vaccine so-called has in it is a little piece of RNA, and we call it messenger RNA, and I can talk to anyone privately about that if they want to know more. But the thing is, it's a template for doing stuff. It's a set of instructions, but it's very, 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 very small. So what they do is they put that on a sandwich, a surfboard, if you like, of graphene nanoparticles. So that's a thin layer of carbon atoms. So they take the thin layer of carbon atoms and they glue this to it. And then they put a bit of fat and polyethylene glycol and stuff around, so they've got a blob. A bubble. They've got a bubble. They've got a protective bubble. And it's also very heat labile, so it's damaged by heat, so they've got to keep it very cold for storage. So the other thing that's quite annoying is that the surfboard on which they launch this little surfer, the messenger RNA, is also toxic to living cells. So not only is there going to be a problem from the messenger RNA that can then start your body making the spike proteins and killing you, which was the aim, obviously. That was what it's meant to do. It's not working as well as they wanted, by the way. And that's why you're seeing more and more, you've got to get another jab, because it's just not as efficient as they want. And mark my words, ladies and gentlemen, in the very near future, because COVID is starting to wear thin, the PR is starting to break down, they will invent another virus. They've already got several in the wings waiting, so there will be another virus and of course another vaccine. So they will keep vaccinating until enough people die and their profit is high enough. So all you have to do, when I asked where is this from, simply follow the money, honey. Follow the money, because money and greed and political power are a trilogy. So that's what it's all about. So they're giving you something which turns you into a genetically modified human being. Yeah, a guinea pig indeed. And then the stuff that goes into the vaccine anyway is harmful in and of itself. So they've got a double banger there. That was quite clever. So I hope that answers your question, that yeah, graphene oxide, not something you want to put into you. There's many, many papers on the internet. Go and look them up. You can still find them because they're in the scientific literature. Go and look using Google Scholar, but they're readily available. Hundreds and hundreds of papers, and there are review papers, so people who have looked at hundreds of papers and then summarised them. So they've got a really good thing.